From Anshei Sphard-Beth Emeth congregation, it's time to take 10 minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of new Hagadah highlights, Part 1. Each year it's interesting to look at different commentators on the Hagadah, and one such interesting Hagadah is the Hagadah of Marbe L'Saper. It was written by Rabbi Yedidia Weil. Rabbi Yedidia Weil was the son of the Korban Netanel, commentary on the Rosh, on one of the great halachic works. His father was very renowned, and he wrote Hagadah. He was a rabbi in many different cities. He wrote an autobiography. He was born in 1720, died in 1805. Let's share some of his commentaries, his thoughts on the Hagadah. Firstly, let's focus on the Karpas, Yachatz, and the beginning of Magid, the Halach Ma'anya, the beginning of the Seder. So first, the Karpas, the celery. So he says that there are some customs in some families, only the head of the household washes his hands. What is that? Some kind of chauvinism? Why should only he wash his hands? If you're supposed to wash your hands, everyone should wash their hands. If you're not supposed to wash your hands, then why should he wash his hands? Answer is because the impurity comes from touching a large piece of food, comes in contact with water or salt water. But there's a custom to give very small portions of karpas for various technical reasons. And therefore, the only person who's touching a large piece of karpas, a piece of celery, a piece of parsley, a piece of potato, is the head of the household. So that's why he washes his hands. And so is the custom in my wife's family, my father-in-law, Alav Shalom, Irving Zuckerbrot, blessed memory. Then he says, what's going on here? We say, anybody who wants to come and eat. Wait a second. The door is closed. It's too late. You can't invite anyone. So he says, no. Their custom was that they opened the door, not only for Elijah's cup, they opened the door for Halach Ma'anya as well, the opening of the Hagadah. When you invite people to come, you open the door. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. Then the question is, he says, it doesn't make any sense. You say, this is the bread, and then you say, oh, everyone's welcome. Wait a second. Don't start the Hagadah talking about the bread of affliction until you invite everyone in. What's going on? He says, look, when a poor person comes in the house, you want him to feel at home. So you say, look, we were all poor in Egypt, so don't feel bad. And also, by the way, I hope everything is good. And it's like a custom when a poor person leaves the house, you say, I hope everything will be okay, it'll be better in the future. So as you take leave, the final words to the poor person are, I hope next year we'll be in Jerusalem, everything will be good. Another idea is that we say, well, we have this bread of affliction. We're here in Galus, we're here in exile. But by inviting people to the Seder, by being hospitable, by giving tzedakah, giving charity to the poor, we're hoping that we'll be able to bring the redemption, because there's an idea of Tzion b'mishpat hipadeh, Zion will be redeemed with justice, v'shaveha b'tzedakah, through tzedakah, the Jewish people will be redeemed. Then there's a question of why in Aramaic. So one theory is that angels don't understand Aramaic. And perhaps the enemy also doesn't understand Aramaic. Now, so we're afraid that there might be people who will be coming in who are going to do you harm, God forbid. But then there's a question. It's Leil Shimurim. The reason we can keep the door open tonight because it's a night that's protected from any danger. So he says, yeah, but not if you invite them in. If you say, hey, everybody come on in, then there's a danger that the wrong people will come in. That's why it's in Aramaic. He also suggests that perhaps the 4 sentences of the Halach Ma'anya correspond to the four periods of Jewish history. Then he suggests maybe the 4 sons. We won't get into that. 4 periods of Jewish history. First period was the period when they first came into Israel. They said, this is the bread we used to eat in Egypt. We just ate it over there. Now we're over here. Then there was a period of destruction. He says, now we're here. Next year we'll be in Israel. But we're not in Israel anymore. Then they came back to Israel in the days of Ezra. He said, but now we're still slaves. Hashata Avde, we're slaves. What do you mean? I thought Ezra, there was a second commonwealth, the second temple, everything was great. No, but we're still under the agency, the auspices of the Persians, later the Greeks, and then the Romans. So therefore, we are still avdei, we are still not independent. And finally, the last sentence refers to the period of exile where we truly are hashata avdei. We are still slaves in every sense of the word, and therefore, Shana Haba, B'nai Chori, next year, will be free, will no longer be in exile. Then the Rabbi Yedidia Weil, who's perhaps related to many German Jews with the last name Weil, he says, what about the yachatz? What's this business of cutting the matzah into two? So there are various technical reasons for it, but let's go beyond that. He says, well, you're going to say lahalach man, you're going to say this is the poor bread. The Gemara says, darko shalani beprusa. If the poor person, he can't afford to buy a full piece, that costs full price. You go to the bakery, you say, hey, you have any shards today? You have any broken cookies, broken matzahs? I'll take them. And he gets it either for free or for a few pennies. And that's why we break it, and then we say, this is the poor man's bread. He says also, we want to have two pieces of bread, two pieces of matzah, because there are two matzahs. There are really two matzahs. The one hand, matzah represents the slavery, halach ma'anya, and matzah represents the freedom, lo yachlu mamea. We couldn't rush, we couldn't take our time, so we had to rush, and that's why it's a bread of salvation. It's a bread of slavery. It's a bread of salvation. Two breads. That's why we have two pieces of matzah. Another interpretation, he says, is that there are two eatings. We're going to eat the matzah, and we're going to eat the afikomen at the end of the seder. The matzah represents one thing, and the afikomen another. He says that's why in the halach ma'anya, in the introduction to the seder, we say anybody who's hungry should eat, and that's the and anyone called it tzrich v'yifsach. Anybody who's hungry should eat the matzah, but anyone who needs the pesach should eat the pesach. What's the pesach? The pesach is the afikomen. The afikomen is eaten at the end of the meal because the sacrifice of Passover was eaten at the end of the meal, so that represents the pesach. So that's why anybody who's hungry should eat the Passover meal. That refers to afikomen. Anyone who wants to could come eat. That refers to the first matzah. The word matzah itself and the word afikomen are very different. Matzah reminds us of riv umatzah. The two people were fighting when Moses broke them up. They were nitzim. Matzah has to do with fighting. So matzah relates to the slavery, the difficult times. Afikomen relates to the word nafik, Aramaic word for getting out and leaving Egypt. So therefore, we talk about the alach ma'anya. That's the first matzah, and the second matzah, the second half of the matzah that we're breaking off, that's L'Shana Haba B'Ard Yisrael, the next year in Jerusalem. Now, why do we cover the afikomen? It says, well, the afikomen represents the future. The future is hidden. The kates is not megula. God doesn't tell us when is Mashiach coming. We don't know. Nobody knows. So it's hidden. That's why it's covered. Then he asks an interesting question. He says, why is it that the Talmud says that no one's allowed to eat until it gets dark? In other words, this year, next week, Friday afternoon, it's going to be Erev Pesach, the eve of Pesach. You're not allowed to eat anything. You can't have any bread after 11:41 here in Memphis, and then you can't have any matzah because you're not allowed to eat matzah on the day before Pesach. Some have a custom 2 weeks, a month before. And then say, well, I'll have lots of fish and chicken. No, you can't fill yourself up after about 3 o'clock. You have to stay hungry for the Seder. Why? So usually we say, well, you want to eat matzah with a sense of hunger and a sense of longing for the matzah. But there's another interpretation he gives as well. He says, what do you mean? He says, what do you think they did in Egypt? You think they gave them a lunch break? You think they gave them a coffee hour? You think they gave them a 3 o'clock tea? Of course not. They work from the morning, a little bread in the morning, they work all day till the night. So therefore, we should feel that. It's a feeling of oppression. It's okay if you feel a little hungry at the Seder. Let the kids wait a few more minutes. Why? Because it reminds us of the slavery. Now, that explains why we say, Kol dichvin yetei v'yichal. Anybody who's hungry should come and eat. If you're not hungry, you're not doing it right. You're supposed to be hungry at the Seder. Anybody who's hungry, observing the Eve of Pesach in the right way, then they should come and we'll help them be full. But if you're not hungry, you're not doing it the right way. That's the way it's supposed to be. Then he claims that the 4 kashas, the Manishtana, relates to the 4 sons. It's a little bit of a stretch, but it's an interesting attempt, and perhaps each one of you can come up with another theory. He says the wise son, he's the one who asks about the matzah. After all, matzah, so many questions. Why is it all matzah? Why can't there be a little bit of chametz? I mean, after all, even a tiny bit of chametz ruins the whole thing. Why is it? The maror would be the rasha, it'd be the wicked son. The maror, he says, what is this bitter herbs? I don't mind eating matzah balls, but what's this maror? I'm not going to eat that stuff. And the Tam, he's a visual learner. He's simple. He says, look, I see people are dipping. What's going on here? And then we try to encourage the kids to ask. We lean. We do all kinds of very visible, physical things to make the kids learn. Perhaps he's a learner who's a tactile learner. So you're leaning, reclining. So you hope he's going to ask a question, but Nebuch, he didn't ask any questions, so you have to tell him about the 4th question. One could also suggest that Talmud says, the Mishnah says, that really the 4th question is about the Paschal lamb. But we don't have a Paschal lamb, so really there is no 4th question, so that's the question. It's not asked. The question that we have in our Hagadah really was not originally asked. So that's the question of the son who can't ask. That's my idea. Finally, for today's session, he says that another question of the Chacham, he says, Manishtana, why is this year so different? He says, it's very different. What do you mean, how is this not different? It's tremendously different. It's different than any other day of the year. He says, no, but there's one other day that's just like it, but it's different. Manishtana. And that is the Pesach Sheni. It says in the Torah in Parshas Ba'aloscha that if you miss the Paschal lamb, it's all right. You can make it up the next month. Exactly a month later, you take out the Pesach, the matzah, and the maror, you eat it together. But the thing is, you don't have to clean your house again. You could eat, you could have bread for dessert. You could have a nice piece of cake for dessert with all the wheat and all the high-rise cake. And for the first course, eat the matzah and the maror and the Pesach and the korban Pesach and the Paschal lamb. So he says, I don't understand. A couple of years ago, we were impure. We had the second Pesach. There was plenty of chametz. How come tonight kula matzah? Manishtana, why is tonight different? Not than every other night. That's, of course it is. But the other night we're referring to is the Pesach Sheni night. Why is tonight different than that night? These are some interesting thoughts from a rabbi who was born almost 300 years ago, and a fascinating character. And I hope you enjoyed these thoughts. Join us next week, God willing, Yirtzeh Hashem. We hope to continue the thoughts from Rabbi Yedidya Weil, the Hagadah of Marbe L'Sapir. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks to Jason Lefkowitz for our production. Join us again here at the Anshei Sphard-Beth Emeth congregation for a discussion of the Parsha and the various holidays. Thank you, and we wish everyone Chag Kosher V'Sameach.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein. To learn more, visit asb.org.